Without objection, the bill shall be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection to order, the chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. Clerk, please designate the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2096 is offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Amendment is considered as read. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. The men and women of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department serve their community every day to keep the district safe and secure. In doing so, members of the department routinely place themselves in dangerous situations to protect others. And yet, progressive D.C. Council policies have targeted district police officers and needlessly placed them in unsafe situations. On January 4, 2023, the D.C. Council passed the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act of 2022. The act targeted D.C. police officers, taking away employee protections and making their jobs more difficult, despite rising crime in the district. When D.C. Council passed this law, Congress acted swiftly and in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion to overturn it. The House and Senate passed House Joint Resolution 42, which would have overturned the entire D.C. law, with 14 House Democrats and 6 Senate Democrats joining Republicans in support of the resolution. Then President Biden, however, vetoed HJR 42, allowing the harmful policies of the D.C. Council to remain in effect today. In another attempt to protect D.C. police, Representative Gabarino introduced a second bill to repeal certain provisions of D.C.'s Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act. The bill also passed through this committee last Congress. This bill, H.R. 2096, is identical to that last legislation. H.R. 2096 restores D.C. police officers' right to collectively bargain over disciplinary matters and restores clear timelines for disciplinary investigations, putting them back on equal footing with other unionized employees in the district. H.R. 2096 also repeals the D.C. Council's requirement that the time and place of some adverse action hearings be postponed to a public website. This public posting requirement would allow activists to harass officers attempting to pursue their due process in the workplace. This legislation is necessary to support the recruitment and retention of the Metropolitan Police Department. D.C. cannot afford to lose police officers during the ongoing crime crisis. My Republican colleagues recognize the importance of supporting the law enforcement officers who risk their lives to protect our communities. By restoring employee protections, this legislation gives the Metropolitan Police Department officers the due process they deserve. Everyone should feel safe right here in the capital city. And I'm proud to support this bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. I now yield to the ranking member for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose H.R. 2096, which would repeal provisions of a law enacted by the District of Columbia. The more than 700,000 D.C. residents deserve self-government, and the Supreme Court has held Congress may delegate full legislative authority to D.C. for local matters. We are here considering a bill Republicans claim will increase the retention and recruitment of D.C. police officers at the same time that Republicans are refusing to undo the outrageous $1 billion cut they made to the D.C. local budget in the fiscal year 2025 full-year continuing resolution. As a result of that cut, D.C. imposed a citywide freeze on hiring, promotions, overtime pay, and bonuses, and may soon lay off or furlough employees, including police officers. 9 weeks ago, immediately after passage of the CR, the Republican-led Senate, with the support of President Trump, passed the bipartisan District of Columbia Local Funds Act of 2025, which would reverse the $1 billion cut. The House has not acted on it. I ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a letter from the National Fraternal Order of Police to House leadership urging passage of the D.C. Local Funds Act, which it called, quote, critical to preserving the ability of the Metropolitan Police Department to protect the residents and visitors to the District of Columbia, close quote.
Without objection to order.
Before I turn to the substance of H.R. 2096, I want to address the bill's purpose section, which says the purpose is, and I quote again, to combat the rise in violent crime in our nation's capital, close quote. However, violent crime is not rising in D.C. In fact, year to date, violent crime is down 23%. And last year, violent crime was down 35%, reaching its lowest level in over 30 years. Police officers are entrusted with extraordinary authority to carry out their public service mission. The vast majority of officers exercise it honorably and bravely. However, there must be accountability and transparency for those instances in which a police officer might violate their oath of office. Following the devastating murder of George Floyd in 2020, the D.C. City Council enacted the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act of 2022. This legislation included provisions allowing the D.C. Chief of Police to discipline and terminate officers who have committed serious misconduct. Every single D.C. police chief for the past 25 years has explicitly requested this authority. H.R. 2096 would inexplicably repeal that authority. Republicans blame the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amending Act for D.C.'s difficulty retaining and recruiting police officers. However, they fail to mention that police departments across the country have had difficulty retaining and recruiting police officers since before the policing reforms enacted after the murder of George Floyd. I want to close with a question for my Republican colleagues. If you support police officers, why haven't you installed on the western front of the Capitol the honorific plaque listing the names of the brave police officers, including from the D.C. Police Department, who defended this Capitol on January 6th? Federal law requires its installation by March 15th, 2023. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair